You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. There's a lot of talent and expertise in the hands of the staff at B&H. It's on display in the work we do. And at the podcast, we've been fortunate enough to have hosted many conversations with the incredible folks from the store and the various departments here at 440, as we call the office. We've talked about an Irving Penn exhibit at the Met, about night photography, about camera expos, when we used to have those things. Those are the good old days. And of course, about new cameras and gear. So it's really satisfying to welcome to the show two members of our immediate group of colleagues on the Explorer blog, Jill Waterman and Howard Gotfryd, to talk about their photo stories. As many of our listeners know, Explorer is the news, tips, and reviews, quote-unquote, section of the B&H website. And it's a team of writers, editors, photographers, and designers who publish topics from photography and video, audio, computers, mobile tech, yada, yada, yada. Today, we welcome back to the show Jill Waterman to talk about a personal photo project she's been working on for 37 years now. Talk about procrastinating. I figured 12 years, okay, maybe 37, she's great. Jill, all kidding aside, Jill is a writer and does great interviews on Explorer. And recently in 2020, she joined us when we spoke with photographer Sally Davies, which is a wonderful show. We also have a very special welcome for Howard Gotfryd, who is the senior copy editor at B&H Explorer. Howard is the fortunate one. He gets to read all of our articles and podcast copy. Isn't he the lucky guy? And he also makes us sound better than we actually are. Howard is a real pro. Howard has the final stamp of approval on our work and is very responsible for shaping the style and tone of the written words that you see on the B&H Explorer website. But in addition to years in the newsroom and on publishing teams at Newsweek, Sports Illustrated, and other magazines, Howard was a working photographer and a photo assistant. But today, he's here to talk about the life and career of his father, Bernard Gotfryd, who after surviving World War II, emigrated to the U.S. and had a long career as a staff photographer for Newsweek magazine. Welcome, guys. Howard, we're going to start with you, and then after a break, we're going to focus on what Jill's been doing on with her New Year's Eve project. But let's start with you. So, Jill, chill, have a tea, and join us as you feel. But Howard, when did your father first come to New York City, or the United States, I would assume?
Well, before I answer that question, Alan, I just want to thank all of you for having me on the podcast today and giving me the opportunity to talk about my father's rather incredible life. He came to New York in 1947 after surviving 6 concentration camps during the Second World War, 3 in Poland, which was the country where he was born, and 3 in Germany and Austria.
Wow. Did he ever talk about that, or is he the type of person who just clammed up and never wanted to speak about what he had experienced?
In August of 1942, when my grandmother was deported to Treblinka, she made my father promise that if he survived, he would tell the world what happened to them. And he did survive. And he did tell the world what happened to them. And he even wrote a book of short stories based on his experiences called Anton the Dove Fancier and Other Tales of the Holocaust.
Wow. Okay.
And Howard, just to jump in real quickly, I also know that on your mom's side, she's also survived concentration camps along with her mother, and that's an incredible story. As you told me, how they had to pose as sisters, if I'm not mistaken, or as friends, in order to not be separated.
Well, they posed as sisters because when they were being inducted, my grandmother saw what was going on and saw that mothers and their children were being separated immediately. So my grandmother lied and said, "This is my baby sister." And they stayed together. And my grandmother was able to keep my mother alive. And my parents were from the same city in Poland, but because they were much, much younger when the war first broke out, they didn't know each other. And they didn't meet until they were both here in New York because of a relative of my father's who knew my grandparents.
Oh, wow.
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 And I mean, that's obviously a great story, and there's a lot more to come on that. Tell us a bit how your dad got into photography. Was he shooting as a young boy? Was that possible? And when did he pick it up?
Yes. In fact, for his 11th birthday, he was born in 1924. So in 1935, for his birthday, he was given a Brownie camera because he was very interested in photography. And he started shooting when he was 11 years old. And then during the war, when he was living in the ghetto with his family before the deportations really started to get hot and heavy, he had a job in a small photo studio in the city of Radom, Poland, where he grew up. And he learned a great deal there, and he learned about how to work in a chemical darkroom and also how to do studio portraiture.
Wow. And just out of a chance, are there any photos that he took that exist from the war years?
Not during the war years that I know of, but we do have a few family photographs of the rooftop of the apartment building where he grew up. And I think there are one or two photographs of my great-grandmother that he shot that I still have somewhere in my files.
So, thank goodness he survived the war. He came to New York. He met your mom. He started a family. Did he start right into the photo business? Did he know he wanted to do that, or did it take him a while to get, his feet under him?
Well, he came here in 1947, and he was sponsored by cousins that were already here. And the first job he had was at a photo lab in Manhattan that was called Wyman and Lester, and he worked as a negative retoucher for a few years. Retouching large format, 4x5 negatives with razor blades and pencil.
I remember that. That's true. That's right. If the shadows are too heavy, you would take a fresh straight edge blade and basically shave away some of the density. And if it was too thin, you would take soft lead pencils and basically pencil it in a little bit. That was a very common thing. And if you knew what you were doing, it did not look like pencil marks. I actually remember people who did that. I really do. Talk about an art. Boy, Photoshop has come a long way. I'm telling you, it's really something.
Well, that was really analog Photoshop.
Yeah.
So how did your dad come to Newsweek? Around when did he come to Newsweek? Because, again, coming from a small town in Poland, maybe speaking English, maybe not, and then coming to a whole new country with very, very little. I don't even know if he had a camera with him or not. I don't. Do you know if he had any gear with him, or did he just start fresh?
He started fresh. After 2 years in the States, in 1949, he was drafted by the U.S. Army, who promised him a speedier path to citizenship if he enlisted.
Yeah.
And of course, that didn't happen until late 1953, some 4.5 years later. But because of his photo experience, he was placed in the Signal Corps and trained as a combat photographer. And he was stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia.
That alone must be an amazing story. I don't know if you have anything from that at all, but we could probably do a huge show just on that alone.
I have an envelope full of little prints of some of the photos he took at Fort Benning.
Interesting. Yeah. I'd also be curious to see if any of the training manuals, because that would be amazing to see how do they prep somebody to be a photographer in combat conditions. A lot of this is just gut, but I'm just curious to see how the armed forces train these people.
Yeah, they probably put them in a foxhole and throw live grenades at them, I would imagine.
But he never went to Korea, if I'm not mistaken, right?
He did not ship out to Korea. He was discharged from active service at the end of 1950.
Right.
And then he spent another 6 years in the reserves.
Gotcha.
So he would go for, I think, monthly maneuvers upstate, maybe at Fort Drum.
Interesting. So what was the career path from retouching large format negatives with razor blades and pencils to taking pictures for Newsweek, which for those of you who are old enough to remember was a major publication. It was the competitor to Time magazine. It's where you went to once a week to find out what's happening in the world. Once a week.
Well, I'm glad you asked, Alan. Here's what happened. When my father was stationed at Fort Benning, there was going to be a special weekend of maneuvers one summer, to which General Omar Bradley had been invited to attend and observe. That weekend, the base would be closed to the press. And the phone rang in the Signal Corps office. My father answered the phone, and it was the bureau chief from Newsweek's Atlanta bureau asking if there was anyone who could make a portrait of the general because Newsweek was working on a story about him. So my father,
After a long pause.
after no pause at all, replied, "Oh, yeah, I can do that." So he was assigned by Newsweek to get this portrait of the general. The day came. My father approached the general and his staff. It was a very hot, muggy day, as you can imagine, in the summertime in Georgia. The fatigues that soldiers wore in those days were very heavy. My father had cameras hanging all over him, dripping sweat, asked the general if he could do a portrait, and he was given permission. And of course, he was using a 4x5 speed graphic with negative magazines, film holders. And he shot one, and then, he flipped the film holder around and shot another, saluted, and said, "Thank you, General." And Bradley said, "Will that be all?" And my father said, "Yeah, one of them will be good." So he was cocky in his youth. So as my father was walking away, he told me he heard one of the general's staff say, "It's a good thing he wasn't from Life magazine, or we would have been here all afternoon."
Probably true too.
he sent the film to the Atlanta bureau. It was sent to New York for processing. It ended up in the magazine, and a week later, the phone rang, and my father picked up the phone in the Signal Corps office, and it was the Atlanta bureau chief from Newsweek. Told my father, "Write down this phone number, and when you come back to New York, call. There will be a job waiting for you."
Wow.
So for the first 3 years, from 54 to 57, my father was a darkroom tech at Newsweek. And then in 1957, Aldous Huxley was in New York pitching his latest book. And the one staff photographer was out on assignment. So my father said, "I can do this." So they gave him a speed graphic with 3 broken shutter speeds. My father rushed over to the Waldorf Astoria, where Huxley was staying, photographed him, was invited to stay for lunch, had a long conversation with Huxley, who admonished him about the evils of television. So as a result of that first assignment for Newsweek, my television time was limited to 30 minutes a day for many years.
Because of Aldous Huxley?
Because of Aldous Huxley.
So his career kind of progressed from there, getting more and more assignments. I mean, the work I know of his is primarily portraiture, and we'll talk about the book that you guys did a bit later in the episode. But he must have done a whole range of things. No, I mean, activities, breaking news, or I know it was a weekly magazine, but
you had to be good at everything to do that. I mean,
sure.
Everything from portraiture to breaking news to just whatever comes up.
Yeah, this is true. My father, most of his subjects were icons and celebrities, people in the news from 1957 through 1988, people who helped shape the second half of the 20th century, people in arts and letters, politicians, religious figures, dancers, choreographers,
and
authors.
Go ahead, say it. The Beatles. Go ahead.
When the Beatles came to New York in 1964, the weekend of February 8th and 9th, to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show, Newsweek assigned my father to go to the Ed Sullivan Theater and photograph them. So he was there for the press conference on Saturday, the 8th of February, and he was there for the performance the next evening and photographed them as well.
Wow.
And you, by the way, just a little thing. There's another person connected with B&H whose wife was in the balcony, and every time you see the audience shots of the screaming girls, okay, up in the balcony at the Ed Sullivan Theater, okay, that's his wife. So there's
Wow.
a couple of funny little connections to that show at B&H alone.
It's a small world, I think.
You also had, through your dad, you had a little gift swap or something like that with Paul McCartney. Am I correct about that?
Oh, well, I was 9 years old at the time, and my father was, going to go to the Ed Sullivan Theater to photograph them, and it was their first time in the States. And my father said, it would be very nice if you sent them some kind of a gift. And I said, I'm 9 years old. I don't have any money. I don't have a job. What am I going to give them? And he said, well, something from your room. And his suggestion was some like cheesy little Mexican marionette that I had. And I said, no, I don't think that's a good idea. So what I did send them through my dad was a Native American peace pipe that we had bought as a souvenir at some upstate reservation when I was very young. And my father came home and told me, in other words, that Paul McCartney had kind of glommed onto it. And as they were leaving the studio with all the confusion and girls screaming and police and security people, Sir Paul stopped in the doorway and said, "Oh, I forgot the pipe," and turned around and ran back into the studio to retrieve it. And I don't know where that pipe is today. I hope he still has it.
And you know why he ran back to get it before he went back to the hotel. You know exactly what the deal is on that.
Well, I didn't know when I was 9. I may have some suspicions now.
That's a great story. That is so great.
And if I'm not mistaken, you have a letter, or is it a photo that's written on the back regarding that?
Yeah, I have
holding the pipe?
framed. Yeah, I have a framed triptych of photos. Two photos that my father took from February 8th, 1964, and then in May of 1968, when John and Paul came to announce Apple Records, my father photographed them again. And at that point, John and Paul both signed one of their publicity photos for me. And at the top of it, Paul wrote a little note to Howard with love. Thanks for peace pipe. Heap good.
That's great. That is extremely cool. That's really good.
Totally.
Let me ask you though. Your dad obviously working for Newsweek and other things he did. What, from best to your memory, what assignment did he have that maybe was the most breathtaking to him, or more special, or just profound to him? Anything stand out of, aside from the Beatles kind of thing, which is kind of fun for us, but as far as news events and people he's met and places he's been, what seems to stand out the most about that? There must be one piece that is just the piece.
Well, in fact, there were two. The first one was earlier than 1968, when Robert Kennedy. Well, actually, no. When Robert Kennedy was campaigning for the New York State Senate seat, so it was earlier than 1968. My father was assigned to the press pack that followed him while he was campaigning, and my father spent a week photographing Senator Kennedy, and I think it was very special to him because he admired the senator so much. And when he was campaigning for the presidency, a year or so later, they were on a shuttle flight from LaGuardia Airport to D.C., and the senator dropped some papers on the floor. My father picked them up and handed them to him. Now, while he was campaigning for the Senate earlier, he signed an autograph for my sister and me, and he signed it to Howard and Eva. Best wishes, Robert F. Kennedy. And then a year later on the plane, he asked my father, how are you? And my father said, I'm fine. How are you? And the senator said, I'm fine. And the senator said to him, how are Howard and Eva? And even as a kid, I was blown away by the fact that he remembered us.
I heard that about him, that he was pretty remarkable about that. That's not the first time I've heard that about him. And that's a remarkable quality to have.
Yeah.
It definitely is. Definitely is.
Yeah. And the second assignment, I think the most incredible assignment for my father was in 1983 when Pope John Paul traveled from Rome back to his native Poland, which was my father's native Poland. He spent a week or two traveling with the press corps, photographing Pope John Paul II. And my father had time to go to his home city of Rodham during a break in the action. And it was his first time back in 38 years.
Wow.
I was going to ask, before I was going to ask you if you ever went back, and we moved on. Okay, I'd like to hear this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask also, I mean, did he photograph Holocaust survivors, anyone, whether they were famous or not?
Primo Levi was one of his subjects.
Right.
For sure. Elie Wiesel, Simon Wiesenthal.
Oh, several. Okay, noted people. And, I'm wondering, did he come home, like, for example, after the Robert Kennedy assignment, telling these stories right away, or did you catch up with these stories later when you were older? And what was the dynamic around the house? I mean, were cameras everywhere? Was he, did he go to an office every day, or was he at home working a lot? I mean, how did that kind of play out in the home front?
Well, he would go to Newsweek's office every morning. He'd commute from the place in Queens where I spent the first 18 years of my life. It was what we used to call a two-fare zone. He would take a bus to the subway and then go into Midtown Manhattan he'd get his assignments there. He'd pick up gear. Most of his gear was Newsweek's stuff, even though he did have some personal equipment as well. There was his office, his little home office was in the basement. We had a dark room, a wet dark room in our laundry room, which was also the boiler room. And there was a closet down there there was one shelf that was just full of camera gear. And he shot everything he had Leica M cameras, Nikon F series cameras, Hasselblads, Rolleiflexes, and there was even a 4x5 Graflex camera in his closet.
Any of those around anymore, or are they all history?
They're gone. He sold most of that gear off.
Okay. Interesting.
And did you pick up darkroom skills yourself when as a kid?
Yeah, I did. I would go into the darkroom and say, "Please teach me how to do this." And he would say, "I'm not really a good teacher. just watch me and you'll learn. Just watch me." And in fact, I did pick up a great deal of knowledge from just watching him. And then in my teen years, he also did freelance work, and he would for example, he did some publicity stills from the actual I think it was 16 millimeter film stock of the Maisel brothers film "Gimme Shelter."
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And also Grey Gardens. So he would do print runs of like 1,000 prints, hand printed prints for them, and I would help him with those when I was in my teens. He needed someone to agitate them in the fixer.
It's interesting how the world of photography can, bump, especially over a long career like that, just bump you into some really incredible people and momentous activities, I guess. I mean, those are two huge movies in the documentary sense.
By the way, just a little asterisk on that, okay? At one of the Rolling Stones concerts back in the 60s, at Madison Square, I figure it might have been the Garden. I snuck down from the nosebleed seats, and we were in the third row, friends of mine, and I was standing on a seat with one of the Maisel brothers who was filming that concert. And every time he turned around to do the audience, he bashed me in the back of the head with the film magazine, which I promptly grabbed and would shake violently before I went back to just dancing in the seat. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, so he did a lot of freelance work. He'd come home at night, he'd wolf down his dinner, and he would run down to the basement to either make prints for his freelance jobs or spot them with spot tone. Remember that, Alan?
Oh, yes. I still have a couple of bottles floating around somewhere. They're probably not even usable. Did he enjoy this stuff? Like you said, he would finish dinner and go down to the base. Did he enjoy what he was doing? I mean, because there's some people, again, we're romanticizing a lot of this, but it could have just been a job to him. But I'm assuming, though, and it sounds like it really was a passion that he really enjoyed going down there. Am I right about that?
I never really asked him whether or not he enjoyed his work. I think he was definitely a type A personality, so he always had to be busy. He always had to be occupied. He always had to be doing something productive. So, if that's a barometer, I guess he did enjoy his work, and he loved taking pictures.
Okay.
The freelance jobs were things that I'm kind of comparing it to our situation today to some degree, and I'm going to follow up with a question. I mean, did he feel he had to do those to, make a little extra money, or was it just stuff that he enjoyed and it came up? And to follow up, I mean, he worked for Newsweek for 30 plus years. It was, I'm assuming, a pretty stable middle class job, and he had benefits, and he was able to raise his family just on that salary alone.
That's true. And the first 10 years of my life, we were a one income family. And then when I was 10 years old, my mother went back to graduate school. Mm-hmm. And 4 years later, she had her master's in early childhood education and was working full time as a second grade teacher. Okay. So then we became a 2-income family.
I see. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just wondering how tough it was then to make a living as a news and editorial photographer, because we know it is.
Well, before that, my father's income was really what we lived on, and that allowed my parents to buy a house, a little 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath house in eastern Queens.
So before we get to talking about his archive a bit and the book that you guys did together, real quickly, I want to ask about one more famous person that he came into contact with, and It's Nina Simone, who, as it turns out, he and your family became friends with her and her family, which, just in addition to being, crazy about her music, it just seems like such an odd fit somehow. Your dad, a Holocaust survivor, and A-type personality from Queens, and Nina Simone hanging out together. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think he first photographed Nina in around 1961 or 62. I think what drew them to each other was the fact that they were both artists. They both came from persecuted groups, persecuted demographic people, and I guess they had a great deal to talk about. And they were friends. They kind of went their separate ways in the late 60s. My father said that it was because Nina was radicalized by the civil rights movement and dropped all her white friends. However, more recent conversations I've had with Nina's daughter, Lisa, and her husband, Rob, indicated that was not really true, that one of Nina's best friends right up until her death was her guitar player, who was Jewish. So I believe that it was just, two artists with large egos. And, my father, he had a very strong personality. And I think that's probably part of what maybe drove a wedge between their in their friendship. But early on, we attended Lisa's birthday parties when she was little, and my father acted as an agent to find a summer rental for Nina and her husband, Andy Stroud, on Cape Cod in the summer of 1963. And after my father died, we hadn't been in touch for, like 50 years. After my father died, I sent emails out to all the people in his AOL email database to let them know that he had died. And I got a very nice reply from Nina's daughter, Lisa. And since then, we're sort of back in touch and maybe carrying on the legacy of our parents' friendship.
Interesting.
Only, much warmer and friendlier terms, I think.
Oh, man. Can you imagine?
Moving forward now, you became the steward of your dad's archive. As he got older, you worked with him to get things organized, and since then he's passed away. What's become of the negatives? Who holds the rights to the work? I'd imagine I don't know, did Newsweek own it? Did he own it? Or what's the deal with that? And how are you getting his work out there these days?
Well, this is a very complicated question to answer, Alan, because my father, when he retired from Newsweek, part of his deal with Newsweek was that the copyrights for the photos would revert to him, because he discovered early on in his tenure at Newsweek that every 6 months the photo department would basically throw away all the negatives and slides.
Ooh, wow!
From the past 6 months, because they didn't have the physical space to house an archive that huge, and they were really only interested in current events and not historical significance. So when my father got wind of that, he would retrieve his negatives, his black and white negatives in color, and his 35 millimeter chromes, and bring them home. Now, at this point in time, there are about 10,000 of his images in the Library of Congress. There are about 1,100 images in the New York Historical Society. There are images in the Brooklyn Historical Society. The Hoover Institution has his papers and some photographs. The NYU Library has some of his work.
And how did they get this? Is this because of work that you did, or is he did this along the way?
He did it along the way.
Okay. All right.
Without consulting me, without talking to me about it. And this took place probably over the last, 30 years or so. And people wrote to me after he died. For the first year after he died, people wrote to me to ask permission to use his photos, like from the Library of Congress, if they found them. And I was pretty lenient with nonprofit organizations and organizations, whose cause, I might be sympathetic to.
Mm-hmm.
But for commercial purposes, I would ask for a royalty, and especially like political things or commercial books. But after a year, I got a little frantic about this, because I wasn't really sure whether or not I really held the copyrights. So I wrote to the Library of Congress, and I got a lovely letter back from their director of prints and photographs, who had been part of the two-people team who came to my parents' home to look through my father's archive in 2004.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she said, I loved meeting your parents. They were wonderful people. I'm sorry they're gone. And she sent me a copy of his contract with the library, which states the photos were restricted only during the photographer's lifetime. In other words, all those 10,000 images are now in the public domain.
Public domain, which means anybody could use them for anything.
That's correct. And they don't need to ask my permission. And I've already found some small fly-by-night photo agencies that downloaded some of the high-res scans from the library and are licensing them and selling prints. And there's really nothing I can do about that.
But you've also, and you can clarify if you don't mind, the relationship that the images have with Getty. I assume they're one of the agencies that are selling these images, but because they're kind of the big player, they can muscle some of the other agencies around. Is that true?
Well, he left me his Getty Images account. There were about 1,100 pictures in that account. And they do generate a small amount of income from one-time publishing rights.
Is that separate from what's in the Library of Congress, or there's some duplication?
Well, I haven't done a deep search, but I believe there may be some duplicate images in both collections. Mm-hmm. And I did speak to an attorney at Getty, and he said, even if there were duplicates, he said, we can still market and monetize your father's pictures. And the account manager has asked me if I feel like it to download images from the library and, add them to my father's Getty portfolio.
Is that legal?
Of course it's legal.
Okay. Well, yeah, I imagine it would. Yeah, it's free stuff. You could take it. Yeah.
It's just a lot of work. Let's talk a little bit about the book that you guys did, because that seems to be a pretty good testament of the work that he did. Obviously, it's just a selection, but there's just incredible personalities and photos from, like you said, the 50s through the 80s. And can you talk a bit about that, and then share the name?
Yeah, I can. I'd just like to, just in closing this previous question, my father kind of left me a mess that I now need to clean up in terms of, what to do with the balance of his archive that I have. And, in contrast to the work that's already in various collections. So, I'm going to be spending my so-called golden years, or at least a portion of them, dealing with that mess.
Right.
The book is it's just a tiny fraction of the entire body of his work, and it's something that he promised my mother he would do, and he did publish it. I think he actually published it the year that my mother died in '06. And there are about 100 photographs of people in the arts, people in politics, performers, all black and white. And I just want to point out that my father rarely used flash, and all his portraits were done with available light when he was on assignment, because he never had enough time to set up lights or an assistant to carry bags of gear. And he really hated the look of on-camera flash. So he always used available light. And he did this book, and I wrote the foreword for him, and I helped him arrange the order of photos, and I edit. Each photo has a little story that goes with it. So I edited those for him because, as you know, English was probably his fifth language.
Yeah.
Who edited your text, Howard? You always edit ours. Who edited yours? I'm just curious.
Yossi Mandel.
That was fast.
Some things we don't forget.
So, of all the images that are in the book, well, first of all, what's the name of the book? And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about the availability of it, which is also a tricky subject. But what's the name of the book, and what's your favorite photo in the book, Howard?
Oh, let me see. Let me grab my copy. The book is called The Intimate Eye, Portraits by Bernard Gotfryd. My favorite portrait, it's a photo of the ballet choreographer George Balanchine, surrounded by a group of young ballerinas with one foot on point, and Mr. Balanchine is sitting on the floor, and they make a semicircle around him. He's got his legs crossed and his hands folded over one knee, and you can see the really worn out sole of his shoe. But he's sitting there looking very regal in a suit and tie with these lovely dancers surrounding him. It's one of my favorite images of my dad's.
Wonderful. Did he photograph anybody that you really were crazy about? I mean, when you were young, other than the Beatles, I mean, as you got a little older, did he bump into any of your heroes and you were really excited about the work he was doing? And
in the late 70s or early 80s, he photographed the singer-songwriter James Taylor, whose music, I had been listening to since the 1960s, and was one of the reasons I learned to play guitar.
Wow.
And he never told me he photographed James Taylor. I only found out like years later when I saw the photo on Getty's website.
And are there still images that haven't been seen by anyone since they were archived by him? I mean, is everything been gone through?
I have some color slides of Paul McCartney and John Lennon from May of 1968 in their hotel room in New York when they came to announce Apple Records, that may have been seen by 4 or 5 people that were never published.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right, then. Well, I think that, along with your guitar playing, and is going to be fodder for another episode.
Okay, so it'll be fodder for another episode, and we can talk about my fodder.
Okay.
All right. Howard, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really good having you on the show. We waited too long to have you here, and hopefully we'll have you back at another time.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very
Thank
welcome.
you. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed this as well.
All good. All good. We are going to take a short break, and we come back. Jill Waterman will be joining us with New Year's Eve. Stay tuned.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes in your podcast app or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website and join the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
Okay, we are back. Jill Waterman is a photographer, editor, writer, and content strategist. She has worked for Photo District News and B&H Explorer and is the author of the 2006 book, Night and Low Light Photography. As mentioned, Jill's been working on a project that is epic in scale, but also intimate and casual in execution, which is one reason it's so intriguing. She's been photographing New Year's Eve every year for the past 37 years. You might be saying, well, I know other people have been photographing New Year's Eve too, but not to the extent, okay? And she's also been doing it in cities around the world, and except for New York, she's not repeated one location. This year, Jill was in Nashville, but the series has been in Paris, Cape Town, New Orleans, just to name a few. Jill, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Alan. Great to be here. Happy New Year.
Yes, ditto. You know, it's a really funny thing. It's a unique night, and you've been recording that particular night for decades now. Does any particular night stand out to you, and if so, why?
You know, that's sort of an impossible question to answer in terms of a favorite because they're all so unique and different. But several years ago, I sort of started what I referred to as a top 10 list.
Okay.
Where, you know, there's various aspects of different places that really stand out. Like, for example, the most explosive New Year's, I'd say, would have to be Amsterdam. People just go nuts there with fireworks. I mean, literally, they light cars on fire. It's just like World War III.
You've obviously never been to Bensonhurst, Brooklyn on New Year's Eve, have you?
Yeah, maybe that is in my future. You know, the most colorful New Year's, I would say, would have to be Nassau in the Bahamas, where they put on this parade called Junkanoo. It's sort of similar to what they do in Philadelphia with the Mummers Parade. But they do it twice. They do a first parade on Boxing Day and then another parade on New Year's Eve that starts at like 1 a.m. and goes through the next afternoon.
Mm.
You know, the most authentic New Year's I think I've ever experienced was in this tiny little village outside of Oaxaca in Mexico. It's called Teotitlan del Valle, where everybody from the village goes up to this grotto and has a huge party that lasts for 2 or 3 days over New Year's, and they toast the New Year with mezcal, and they people come back, you know, kids who have moved away from the area come back, and they have a big family gathering, and it's just very, very, very intimate.
You've been doing this now for close to 4 decades. I'm going to ask you a 2-part question. The first one is relatively easy, I guess, and the second one is the one that may be a little more complex. And that is that at what point, after how many years did you realize, you know, something, this is kind of a project I got going on here, maybe I should continue doing this?
Yeah.
And that, okay, followed by, you could follow that one with Now that you're here doing it this is your 37th year, you obviously have evolved. Obviously, we grow, we mature, everything else. But if you were able to go back, how would you approach this event, New Year's Eve, photographically, with 37 years behind you? So first, I'll let you do the first part and follow with the second part.
Yeah, well, there's definitely been an evolution to the project on multiple levels. I went out for the first year when I was living in Paris because I had nothing to do, and I just was curious about what people in a foreign country would do on New Year's Eve. And I had so much fun, I decided I made a New Year's resolution to do go to a different city every year after that, and I've kept at it. But the first several years were very by the seat of my pants. I would just go to a place where I had a friend or, had a place to stay, and I wouldn't research it. I would just go out on the street and look for pictures. Um, the turning point came, I think, one of the big turning points came in 1996 when I was going to photograph New Year's in New Orleans, and I had read something in a paper about an art auction, and they were having a big New Year's party with an art auction, and I contacted the hosts and offered to give them some prints in exchange for access to photograph, and that turned into me getting a front page lifestyle feature in the New Orleans Times-Picayune, and I realized the power of publicity and also the growth of the internet. It made research a lot easier. I all of a sudden had access to events at my fingertips once the 90s and 2000s rolled around. And then there was, in the mid 90s, all of a sudden people started talking about the millennium. And I had never even dreamed about that when I first started photographing New Year's, but all of a sudden it became a big deal. And people got attracted to my project because of that. So I got a lot of opportunities in the mid to late 90s to photograph in different cities based on the coming of the millennium and the buildup of festivity.
And how were you kind of deciding then where to go? I mean, was it a matter of just researching what looked interesting, like that town in Mexico sounds incredible, or was there also, like you said, some variations on assignments pushing you to places?
Well, it started with places where I had a local contact, either a friend or someone I met who told me about something interesting in their hometown that would happen on New Year's. That's been a big key. But then over time, I've done more and more research about places that have remarkable events built around New Year's. And so I have a whole short list of places that I want to go, and also the places that are real dream places that are far off exotic locales, and then the ones that are more safety places that are easier to access.
What's one of the dream places?
Certainly Australia is one continent I haven't been to because it's so far away, and they do a big celebration at New Year's. Japan, New Year's Eve is very important in Japanese culture. But one place I just learned about that's sort of a dream place that am hoping to go to next year is the island of Madeira, where they host the largest fireworks display in the world on New Year's Eve.
And is it generally, or has it always been places that are celebratory and public and lots of people, or have you done any kind of more intimate or solemn religious, places?
Well, There have been aspects of solemnity and intimacy, or tradition woven into celebration. Like in Rio de Janeiro, the big event is that people go to the ocean and they worship the goddess Imanja, and they throw flowers and offerings into the ocean on New Year's Eve. And that's a very solemn, um, very spiritual event. And there are aspects in those situations where I have to be very careful about how I'm photographing and how I'm covering the scene, so to, be respectful, but still get pictures. But at the same time, there's also fireworks and tons of people on the beach. And there's so many different activities happening simultaneously. It gets, there's a lot of choice in the matter.
Have there been any places that you considered a dud after all was said and done? Seriously, because, again, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, including weather.
Yep. The biggest sort of almost missed opportunity happened, I'd say, early on in 1990. I decided to go to Washington, D.C., because I have a friend who lives there. And what I didn't know is Washington basically closes down between, Christmas and New Year's because of all the political people, leave the city.
Everybody goes home.
Yeah. So I had a plan to go out with my friends on New Year's Eve. I was in the city going to museums and stuff during the day, and they were going to come in and meet me and bring my cameras. They lived a ways outside the city. It happened to be pouring rain. It was a really, really bad rainstorm, which is always a challenge. It was, the days before the internet and before cell phones and all that. I called my friends to sort of plan when we were going to meet, and there was no answer. And so the friend and I, who were sort of doing the tourist thing, went and had a drink, didn't think anything of it, called in a half an hour, still no answer. This went on for like 2 or 3 hours to like 6, 7 o'clock. And I had no way of getting in touch with them besides going back to their house. So we took a taxi. It was torrentially raining. There was flooding everywhere. I was thinking, what am I going to, what is it going to be that I happen upon? Did the house burn down? I get to their house, and they had little kids, and they were in the living room partying. They had gotten a pizza. They were drinking beer, and the little kid had tripped over the phone cord and disconnected the phone without anyone realizing it. And so they're sitting around just without a care in the world, nice and warm and cozy. And I had to convince them to go out to, put on their jackets and get in the car and drive me back to Washington so I could photograph. And they were not such happy campers about it, but we did. It really was challenging.
Is the point to always, or at least to try to get that moment at midnight too? I mean, to get that celebratory moment? I mean, is that included in everything?
Well, that is, a particular challenge, because it's really hard to figure out where to be at midnight and just what to photograph, and, with the ball drop or the fireworks going off.
When everybody in town is celebrating the same split second, it's hard to be every place.
Yeah.
That really, it's a crapshoot. You really have to just say, all right, I'm just going to stay here and keep my eyes wide open, because that's really all you can do. It's an educated guess based on everything you saw in the hours or days or whatever it is leading up to that point. Okay, you just got to, choose a place and run with it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I tried to, I mean, my coverage actually extends beyond just New Year's Eve. There are many locations where there's celebrations in the days leading up to New Year's or in the days following. And so I incorporate that in my coverage when it's available. Um, and I also scope out many different places and sort of put together an itinerary and, visit different venues throughout the night.
Do you ever have to slip anybody an envelope to get where you have to go to get a good vantage point?
Well, that's where, back in the day when newspapers were still, um, popular, that was where the publicity from a newspaper story would come in handy.
Gotcha. Right.
Because people would see that and be like, "Oh, you're the lady that was featured in the newspaper today." And so I get a lot of good access and positive reinforcement from people who get intrigued by what I'm doing.
Going back to the beginning of this project, you're obviously shooting film. You're still shooting film?
Yep, I am.
Oh, now
And
why?
a black and white film. Well, I'm shooting black and white film, and I also have a small digital Sony RX7 that I can just hang around my neck
Right.
and take sort of like grab shots with. The film is really important to me. One, because I started with it and I built up an archive over the years. And also the black and white is important to me because it sort of condenses time and makes the pictures more, there's more of a thread.
A continuity, is it?
Yeah, continuity and also I mean this some people, might find this controversial, but there's a softer quality to the, black and white film and the lens I prefer to use. I I I prefer the softer, more atmospheric look to, a sharp, realistic representation.
And what about converting colored digital files to black and white? Have you it doesn't work for you?
I mean, it would in a stretch. There are a few color pictures that I really like that I've converted, and I will do that on rare occasions. But again, it goes back to the sort of softer, more atmospheric look of the black and white film
Understood.
that is different with digital, even if it's converted digital.
Between you and me, over the years, I go in and out of going back and forth and starting to shoot film again, just as a break and coming back. And I'm entering that phase again now. Just yesterday, I opened up the case that I have that has all my film cameras in it and started looking around and going, you know what? I think I want to do this. I think I'm going to order some film. So I get that. There is something about using a film camera and working with negatives that is very different. Okay, I'm not going to say better or worse, but different. And that's fine, and that's justifiable enough just by itself. So that's an interesting point, though.
I'm also shooting with a pretty slow shutter speed. I'm using a flash, but I'm doing the sort of slow.
You dragging your shutter,
yeah, so that I get the atmosphere and freeze the motion, and yeah.
Do you use rear shutter when you do that? So that the movement drags behind your subject?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And how many rolls of film will you shoot tonight? Or on New Year's, let's say?
Well, it has ranged. Yeah. The sort of New Year's, full coverage versus the night is different. Like the first year, I think I shot 3.5, 4 rolls. The largest amount of film I've shot when I was in, I think it was probably Austria, and there was a different event every night for, a week and a half. I shot like 30 rolls of film. This year I shot 11 rolls of film, and I think last year, because of COVID, I decided to stay in New York. I had access to Times Square, and there was a lot of events happening in Times Square in the days leading up to New Year's last year that I documented. So I shot about probably 10 rolls of film last year too.
By the way, just as a frame of reference, if you are shooting digital, you could have gotten away with the 1 gig card on most all of these events.
Yeah.
We think about, it's only 256 gigs. I don't know if I have enough to go out and shoot this afternoon. And that's an art and a craft right there. You have to be really observant of what you're doing. You have to be judicious and know that if I'm pressing this button, that's one less frame I have. And there's something to be said about that. There really is.
There, especially, also, I've run into situations where I'll, burn through my batteries in my flash, especially as the night wears on and people get more and happier, let's say. There's a lot of people that come up to me and want their picture taken.
Mm-hmm.
And, some of them are great, people that I would want to photograph, and others are just sort of like sloppy drunks. And so sometimes I have to choose whether to take their picture or not.
And Jill, you had mentioned the word document in terms of New Year's Eve last year. I want to ask how you kind of think of the project after all these years. Do you think of it as a long-term documentary, or do you feel elements of a personal project? Obviously the style that you're doing has a, it lends itself perhaps to both, but certainly stylistic and personal and maybe like a memoir type of thing. Has it gone back and forth? And in the long run, how do you want people to think of the series?
When I first started, one of my motivations was to understand my style, or to find my style. I thought of it as a helpful exercise to really get to know, because I started when I first became serious about photography. I used to be a printmaker. That's what I have my undergraduate degree in. But when I switched to photography was when I first started the project. So it was, I guess, partly an exercise in trying to find a style and a way of taking pictures that interested me. And that's another reason why I've wanted to keep to shooting film, I think.
And I guess the flip side of that is this idea of, showing off the places that you go to. And really kind of making it, okay, this is Mexico or this is Paris or whatever, as opposed to just my experience in one of those towns. And that can be a totally different project. And it's possible to do them both at the same time, I imagine. But I'm just curious if you look at it that way.
I sort of find that, aside from the landmarks, I find that the places and the people have more in common or are more similar than they are different. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that really excites me, is the idea that the world sort of converges on this one point in time and has a similar, view of the future, just for that sort of one kernel of time where people are, thinking similar things and acting in similar ways.
That's a great takeaway. And like going forward, how do you, well, two questions. What would you like to see come of this in the exhibit sense? A book, a massive show at some point, And the flip side of that, and this gets back to a bit our conversation with Howard, how are you archiving it, and how are you going to make this is a
Yeah.
huge body of work now available?
Yeah. Well, it's a challenge, the archiving part, because the pictures have to be scanned, the negatives have to be scanned, and retouched, and all that. Um, I mean, my ultimate goal is to do a book. It's a little bit overwhelming because of the length of time and the amount of uh, material I've amassed, um, to figure out how the book would best be presented.
Right.
Over around the millennium, I had thought about doing a book, and there was an option I was pursuing for that. Um, it was interesting that I decided against that, particularly because of the whole Y2K thing that came up at that time, and it just seemed like the wrong time to do something.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Looking back, do you feel that that was a good decision? I mean, I know I remember what I did on Y2K New Year's Eve. I actually was working on a photo project myself, but I was in the middle of the woods. So it's curious how we look back on that date now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Well,
Interesting.
I ended up spending the millennium in Israel, and I was in Bethlehem, photographing this big peace celebration that they had that was really quite moving and beautiful.
Wow.
But the funny thing is, I was working with this group that did a book on, they sourced pictures from people around the world of the millennium, and I was one of the judges and selecting images for the book. We had gotten a segment on the Today Show, and we were going to be interviewed in different locations around the world. One person in New York, one person in Montreal, I think, Paris. I was going to be interviewed from Israel, and it had to be canceled because the security got so tight that the only place where the security clearance would have been allowed was in Israel, of all things. And so the segment got canceled at the last minute.
That's a shame. And maybe we can talk a little bit about this year. And have you already looked at the images? I mean, is that your process? Do you develop them as soon as possible and make an edit, or how's it going from this past year?
So I haven't. I've developed one roll of film so far. I will be developing the film over the next week or two. I generally develop one or two rolls at a time, so to keep track of the exposures and what I'm getting. I find it hard to edit the pictures immediately. I'm a really harsh critic, and the experience of going through that night and remembering with all the memories fresh in my head, I tend to feel like the pictures fall short, or they don't capture the entire experience. And so it's over time that I find the pictures more to my liking.
I think that makes sense. That's very interesting, though. That's a good. I imagine that's something that you've come to understand after all the years doing it as well.
Yeah, and there's a lot of times where, years after having taken the pictures and gone through, a first edit or even a second edit, and all of a sudden I'll look again and there will be a picture there that I passed over that all of a sudden becomes special. which is really exciting when that happens.
So, Jill, if people want to catch up to some of the work and see what you're doing, I understand there's a documentary that was made about you working on that. You could tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, a friend of mine who's a videographer accompanied me a few years ago when I was photographing New Year's Eve in Las Vegas and filmed me during the night and put together a short documentary about my process that mixes live footage with some of my archival pictures and is a good overview of the project.
Okay.
And that can be found on YouTube?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we'll have links to all of this on our show notes, so people will be able to catch up to that. Howard, what about yourself and your dad's archive?
Well, what I'd really wanted to say before was that my father was sort of a complex and extraordinary personality who somehow through the course of his life always ended up in either the right or the wrong place at the right time. And, surviving the Holocaust, coming to this country through this, whole series of events and coincidences, perhaps, that really sort of pushed him along and got him, into this amazing career that he had, where he met scores and scores of very influential people and photographed them. There were very few people who escaped his lens in those years from 57 through 88, including me. But, he really did have a remarkable life and left an incredible portfolio of images, which you can see if you do a search for his name on the Library of Congress website. There's pages and pages of thumbnails that you can click on and enlarge and see his work.
And again, we'll have links to all of this on our show notes. So if people want to catch up to see some really amazing photography, that's a good place to go. Howard Gotfryd and Jill Waterman, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, it was a pleasure speaking to both of you. If you're not yet a subscriber to the B&H Photography Podcast, head over to wherever you get your podcast and sign up. It's free. It's easy. And you can always find this on the B&H Explorer website and the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group page. My name is Alan Weitz, and on behalf of Jason Tables and John Harris, thank you so much for tuning in today.